really, really helpful. And I like to push continuous professional development for us as well. On the professional side, my background actually prepares me, I think, well to speak to these subjects. The first 15 years of my professional life was spent in commercial construction, actually, and construction project management. So I feel like I have a good understanding of what the vendor sees, what the contractor sees. That I think that's helpful for me as I apply these things to my job today. And then for the last 12 years, I've been spread out over two different amazing schools. About 6 years at the Center for Early Education in West Hollywood, and the last 6 years to date at Marlboro School as the Director of Facilities and Capital Planning. I love my job. We wear a lot of hats, as you can all relate to, I'm sure. RFPs and project management are just two of them, but they're very relevant and they're interconnected. So that's what I'll be talking mostly about today. I think that we're all designated professionals in project management after this last year, I would say, given what we've been through with planning and replanning for, for basically the crux of our life's work, which is education and bringing students back to campus. It's been a lot, but I think it's really lent itself to us becoming sharper in that one area. I like to highlight this cartoon here. I looked for an origination on this cartoon. I can't find it. I think it's been on cubicle walls for decades, different iterations, but it's hilarious to me. I think it's very true. It just illustrates the different dysfunctionalities that we can fall into if we don't follow a process, if we don't communicate, if we don't let the vendors know exactly what it is we want, and if we don't document the project, if we don't, if my favorite one is the billing. If we don't follow a process, we're very likely to end up being asked to pay for a roller coaster when all we ever really wanted was a tire swing. So I think it really illustrates it. Almost actually eliminates my need to talk today because it's just so perfectly illustrated. But we'll still jump into some things. I don't think anybody should talk about RFPs for an hour straight unless you're teaching a class or something. So my goal, like Michelle mentioned, is for me to get through the first half of it with some slides. Please feel free to raise your hand or just jump in. It's a small group. Feel free to unmute and jump in if you have something to share on experience. If you have a suggestion, I certainly don't catch everything here. I'm confident of that. Or if you have a struggle, if you're going through something, you have a question. I think between me and the group, we can probably flush through that. I think this is, what we're doing right now is the way we communicate. I think it's super helpful. With that, I'll jump into what's inside. It's pretty self-explanatory. Just a reminder, I think the more the merrier in terms of participation. Please feel free, don't be shy. That can be towards the end of the presentation, or if it's something that pertains exactly to what I'm talking about, feel free to raise your hand or jump in, and Michelle can help me identify those things. We'll talk about key definitions, when you need RFPs, what goes into them, different types. I actually have a sample that I created at Marlboro fairly recently. And then we'll jump into the interconnectivity of project management, which is a whole nother side of it. I have a mind map and some professional development resources, like I mentioned. And I think, I believe that all of these slides will be available upon request, or maybe they'll just be followed up with and sent out to everybody after the conference. Anybody been to Chris Joffe's? Yeah, I see. Chris Joffe has this great slide at the beginning of every one of his Monday updates, and it's a great tool that where we can recenter and catch our breath. Funny thing is, so I got Chris's permission to use it. I put it in all my slides whenever I present. But the funny thing is, and the difference between him and me is, he uses it for his attendees, and I use it for me as a place to catch my breath and to slow down and to remind me to breathe in and out before I dive into things. So with that, I will continue. And I think the very first thing, as with project management and RFPs, is we should define what we're talking about at the very beginning. So this first one, facilities management, I love this. This is from IFMA, the International Facilities Management Association. Facilities management is a profession that encompasses multiple disciplines to ensure functionality, comfort, safety, and efficiency of the built environment by integrating people, place, process, and technology. I love that definition. I think it hits the nail right on the head for us. I think that IFMA does a great job of defining that, and it's a dynamic, fun definition that really kind of describes us, I think, and then some. Project management, as defined by the Project Management Institute, is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet the project requirements, which is very concise, very true. It's a small definition for a very vast field, but I like it. And then a request for proposal. What is an RFP? It's a business document that announces a project, describes it, and solicits bids from qualified contractors to complete it. And this is very necessary sometimes. Sometimes it's not, which we'll get into. But I think just defining things at the beginning is always super helpful. So RFPs, when you need them, when you don't. I think definitely when you're trying to ensure on a larger size job that multiple vendors are getting the same information, you know, apples to apples, I think they're important. You don't want to have to communicate specific details time and again to different contractors at different times. That's how you end up with them getting a different understanding of what you want. So I think when you're trying to standardize the process, you create an RFP. When additional transparency is needed or it's required by your school's bylaws, that's usually tied to a threshold at a dollar value. That is, I'll get that, Shane. That is, it's good to communicate with your business office so that you know those thresholds. And, you know, there's workarounds. You don't want to kick off what could be considered a conflict of interest, but there's definitely workarounds to this. You know, a lot of times we just flat out don't have time to go through the RFP process. As you'll see, I'll detail out the timeline. It's a good couple of months. You're probably going to spend a month putting it together, and then you need to give people a chance to respond to it, and then you need to give yourself a couple weeks to choose and to vet your contractor. So we all know the reality of a lot of the school projects is time sensitive. So that's a factor too. And Shane asked a good question. What's the difference between an RFP and an RFQ? RFP, request for proposal. RFQ, request for quotation. RFQ is basically when you just want a number and you're not really concerned about the process that gets you up to that. You're really just concerned about the price. So you're asking just for the request for quotation. And that's typically involved when you're trying to see if a project, like you're doing feasibility studies for a project to see if the school can afford it or if it makes sense budgetarily. So you're just talking about how much is it going to cost. That's my understanding, my best explanation for the difference between those. Good question. When you don't need an RFP, candidly, we don't want to overuse them. And I look back, Been in the independent school niche for 12 years and I've done 10. I've issued 10 formal RFPs. There probably should have been a few more along the way, but they are, like I said, time sensitive. They're a little bit of a drain on resources as far as time goes. We all know that's very valuable. But it's up to the school. It really is. And like I said, the school's bylaws. If a project is simple and straightforward, don't use an RFP. If you don't need to go through it, if you're not at that threshold, I think one of my perspectives that I have, having been in the contractor's shoes for so long, I'm mindful of the work that goes into presenting a formal bid package. So you don't want to toss these things around when they're not really necessary, because at the end of the day, time is money, and contractors, they put a lot of effort into getting these out. And if we've all got our contractors that take good care of us, because many of our projects are, this came up, I need it done yesterday. And if you know exactly who you want to perform the work and it's under those caps, RFP is not in the picture.
Hey, Matt, I would just add, you might, I know I've done, like RFPs in the past for food services. I happen to oversee the food services. So that was a good way to get, the same spiel out to a bunch of different food vendors that do schools kind of get them, to compare apples to apples. I've done RFPs. So my point was, they don't always need to be for construction. That's probably the most common, but I've used them for food services. Like I said, I've used them for copier contracts as well, when you've got a lot of players and you're trying to get the best deal. So just wanted to comment, sometimes you might use them for other things.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that. I've got a couple slides that talk about different types, and you're right. And some of these ones that are for that are service-based, food services, transportation, custodial, security, you can really go off a template too. And that's a good tool, and it cuts down on the time needed to create them. Thank you, Shane.
Yeah.
4 steps and a big asterisk, because don't be misled. See, it's down there at the bottom. Don't be misled. The real work starts after the RFP is awarded. But breaking down the 4 steps a little bit that go into creating a quality RFP. First up is discovery and planning. I think this definitely should take the longest. It's where you're engaging stakeholders within your organization to identify exactly what the purpose and the goals of the project are. You're peeling back the onion, and you're really taking your time to make sure that you lay it all out there. It's a good conversational exercise for you and your internal team to really get it on paper, create some spreadsheets, create some design boards on exactly what the school is looking for. The second step is craft and issue the RFP. It's probably my least favorite because it takes a bunch of administrative work, and you're plugging away at spreadsheets or templates. It's all just as important. Each step is just as important as the other. It's a little bit tedious, but it really is your chance to get it as detailed and accurate as you can. It's a good opportunity to ask questions of your bidders. I think this is huge. It tells you a lot about how they answer. I'm careful that the questions aren't too open-ended, because you want to be able to compare them properly. But samples of work, references, who do you compete with, etc. These are all good questions to consider as you craft your RFP. Step 3, compare and rank. And the first one's a little bit harsh. Remove those that did not follow direction or meet defined needs. I think this is totally appropriate, although it sounds a little bit harsh. You can't, as I'll talk to on a future slide, you can't really do that unless you were diligent on getting that information. But I think it is okay to do that when you're comparing these. Also, it's an opportunity to re-engage with the focus group that you had internally from step 1 to help you make the decision and compare these different bidders before you make a final decision. I also think it's a good opportunity to respond to RFIs. In that, say, 2-week window that you give vendors to create their proposal, you also want to give them the opportunity to ask questions about the job, and to probably, site visits are also a good idea. Open that up as an option as well if you can. I like to narrow these down. First of all, I think 5 is probably my max who I'm sending them out to in the first place. I like to narrow them down to 2 or 3, and then I fully vet those 2 or 3 a little bit deeper. And then that brings us to step 4, where we award the job and we communicate to both winners and non-winners. You don't want to burn any bridges. I think it's really important to communicate with people that, with the companies that you're not going with, because you might need them in the future as well. Thanks, Shane. Gail brought up a really good question at our last session that I think I'll touch on under step number 4. You get a lot of politics involved, and you might have contractors that feel slighted for not getting the job and putting a lot of effort into the process. I think a good way around that for larger, I think for service-based projects, or some of the regular reoccurring stuff, I think it's a little bit more accepted that it's just part of the deal in trying to get business. I think for larger scale construction projects, you can definitely consider incentivizing the bid, where you have, say, 3 major general contractors. You're asking for a huge amount of work to go in on the front end for them to bid this, $15 million project. It's definitely okay to build into your overall project budget, say, call it $20,000 for them to go through the bid process. That way there's not the feeling of, wasted time, wasted energy, wasted money, and that can help with that. So what to include in the bid? this is your opportunity. You want to definitely build the brand of the school. You want to incorporate things from your strategic plan. You want to incorporate history and cultural information about the school, talk about the neighborhood, talk about your students and demographic. This is your chance to really let bidders know who you are, so that you're creating that true sense of partnership from the beginning. I think that's hugely important, and real easy to miss too. I think paying a lot of attention to that aspect is good. Also, establishing the relationship this also helps establish the relationship. I think this is very much a two-way street. Contractors are busy right now. They're not taking every job that crosses their path. They're not even bidding on it. I think that establishing a relationship, and you also wanting to sort of sell yourself a little bit. And this ebbs and flows. It's like houses. It's a seller's market. It's a buyer's market. But doing the best you can to create a partnership from day one on the RFP process is going to be helpful.
Hey, Matt, just to go back, you had mentioned putting in like an extra $20,000 in your budget. Would you reimburse the non-winning contractors up to a certain amount? Is that common? I've never seen that before, so that's interesting. It is a tremendous amount of work. It's a lot of money they put forth, and they're not all going to win.
Yeah, exactly. And this is more common with architecture. We call it a feasibility study, and it's kind of on the front end of, is this possible? But the difference is architects, they'll definitely get paid for that time. This isn't a every time kind of thing, but it's every job's different. But we did this on our last big one, where we gave the same amount of allowance to each prospective bidder, each prospective GC. And that, I think it does two things. It gives you higher quality of proposals, where they're doing their homework and they're not feeling bad about needing to waste resources. And it prevents, I think, politics from involving, getting involved when there's, obviously it's the day that everybody can't get the job.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you, in your RFP, you'll list out what you're paying. I mean, you don't get to bill you for their hours, because that could be all over the place. So you just say, we're going to pay $1,500 or $5,000.
Allowance. Yeah. An allowance for reimbursables. Whether it's renderings or just time spent, there might be and you're also, and then you're able to retain these things you're purchasing. It might be a BIM model involved, building information modeling, where that's necessary for the contractor to really dig in and see what they have to do. We're doing an existing building remodel. The building's 100 years old. So without these contractors going out and doing BIM studies, they really can't give an accurate price. So it's kind of a matter of, in my opinion, it's money really well spent, but I think every job's different, and it's a matter of figuring that out in your planning process.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you, though.
Sure. And again, I've never seen this on a service-based RFP, where it's one of the where it's a reoccurring service. I've yet to see anything like that. I'm talking more big capital projects or large construction projects.
Yeah, it would make sense for a custodial bid or food services or something, but for a $50 million construction project, yeah, it might make sense.
Exactly. And I think it goes a long way in willingness for contractors to go all in and deliver a quality product. And at the end of the day, that's 20, even for the ones that don't end up doing the job, I think it can be a very small price to pay on the front end for staying on budget, staying on schedule at the back end. Let me check the chat real quick. Oh yeah, we've got some samples. Cool. So let me go back and just wrap these up. You can include a scoring criteria if you'd like. I do sometimes, and I don't sometimes. If I don't include the actual rubric of how I'm gonna, compare these bids, I'll at least include what matters most to the school. That can be references, samples of work, like I said, tight budget or specific skill set. I'll definitely include when I want contractors to know that. And then just going back on milestones and deadlines, this is important because, as I mentioned, people are, contractors are busy, and it's not always a case of they're going to jump on every RFP that they receive. So especially if they can't meet a significant milestone along the way in the project. So you want to communicate those within your project as best you can so that they're aware of it. And that might save everybody some time off the front end. Jumping ahead, I talked about questions a little bit, asking who they compete with, asking for references. That's all totally fine. I'd like to keep those specific so they can kind of get answered and compared the same way. List of known challenges. I think this is, if you've got problems and you know about them, tell your contractors about them at the same time when you issue the RFP. That way, from day one, you're going to get creative problem solving coming in with the bid packages, with the proposals. And neighbors are an issue, logistics are an issue. You've got a tight timeline, you got a tight budget, which is mostly every job. If you've got to do extra noise attenuation because the perimeter of the job site butts right up to classrooms, talk about that in the RFP. Let contractors know of these challenges so you can start that that problem-solving dialogue from the very beginning. And talked about guidelines a little bit. You can't really take that hard stance of tossing out RFPs that don't meet your guidelines if you don't communicate them effectively. So I think that's kind of a two-way street. You need to double check that you've set the guidelines so that you can hold people accountable to following them. Here to your other question a little bit ago, Shane, this talks a little bit about different types of RFPs. The service-based ones are the ones in our day-to-day operations. We're all so familiar with security, custodial, maintenance, transportation, food services, alarm monitoring, pest control, and landscaping. And I know that the list goes on. These are just some of the few. These are a very different kind of RFP, which I'll get into on the next slide. I think it's these are templates definitely lend themselves to these a little bit easier than project-based, and they auto renew, and they're a little bit more continuous. There's not quite a deadline like projects. Project-based RFPs are more for construction projects, tenant improvement work, capital replacement jobs, and specialty projects. And a little bit more on the differences. Service-based will most likely have set terms, like I talked about. They're annual, they're monthly. They might automatically renew. And I think one of the dangers of this, and one of the things we have to be conscious to avoid, is kind of forgetting about them, especially if you, for example, you've got your custodial contract, you did an RFP 5 years ago, but you're happy with the service, so you just set it and forget it, you leave it. But the problem with that is if you don't set like an annual reminder in your calendar to go back and look at the contract, make sure people are getting pay increases as they should, and you don't want it too much on cruise control. They're a little bit easy to forget about. They've also, they're going to require more specifics and guidance on the front end in terms of frequencies and statements of work. But then once they get going, they sort of run themselves. And like I mentioned, the basic needs being a little bit different in the contractual renewals. Project-based, by definition, a project has a start and a finish. So it's a little bit more finite. It's going to require a lot more of your time for project management along the way and at project closeout, because you're going to have, training on a new area, or, operations manuals to go through and document, and warranties to kick off. And it's going to be documented very differently. I think probably those are the biggest differences, but obviously there's all kinds. Service-based requires some more upfront, and project-based requires more of our attention on the back end. And here's a sample, just a super clean, simple RFP I created at Marlboro about 4 years ago. I changed the dates just to reflect, so that you can see that deadline for proposal submission is today. You can see that I sent this out 2 weeks ago, so that contractors and vendors had, and this is for landscaping services. So contractors and vendors had 2 weeks to ask their questions, get their pricing together, come and do a site visit. I think that's appropriate for something like this. For a big construction project, it's probably longer. The decision date is going to be 2 weeks from today. So that gives me 2 weeks to get back with my team internally and make a decision. and then I'll communicate that out to the winning contractor, and their services would start in about a month and a half from now. So this is the season for RFPs for operational tasks. If you're going to make a change at your fiscal year, more than likely your fiscal year is July 1. You can see a general overview of the project, talking about the school, talking about what we're looking for. I incorporated the school's mission, the school's vision, a comprehensive background about the school. We really want to talk about the demographic, talk about what the school's been through, talk about the schedule and the school day, talk about our campus. I think this is a big one. You have this last sentence here, how it's important to us that we're good neighbors, and that any contractor we bring on board is going to help us uphold the work we've done to maintain neighbor relations. I know that's usually a big deal for schools like us that are situated in neighborhoods. Continuing on to page 3 and 4, general operating requirements are laid out, and then they're followed up by an attachment, actually 3 attachments that were very detailed. I'm not going to put those up, but those are line by line by line on Excel sheets of frequencies of work, everything from when the grass gets mowed, when the weeds get pulled, how often, what days, when we can use pesticides, when we can't. It really lays it out in detail so that we can go back to that. That in the times that I have troubles with vendors, I can typically go back to the request for proposal and the bid, and I can find a deficiency on my part where I didn't explain it properly. So this is all really important, and it's worth spending the time on discovery. And then just the general proposal, what we're looking for, and the rights that we have reserved to make our decision. Okay, that's it. Actually, wait, I have this again for me. That's the cool thing about Chris's breathing slide. You can use it whenever you want. It's like a built-in break. So project management has a direct crossover, and it's the second part of the presentation, but it's no less or more important than RFPs, but it's definitely comes after the RFP. And this was the asterisk that I talked about, where the work really gets intense after the RFP. So you get through that whole process, and then you have your new relationship with your new vendor or contractor, and then we jump into project management. And I'm going to talk a little bit about using a construction manager versus self-performing, the owner's representation. I'll talk about that in a second, but I want to preface that by saying either way, we should be involved. We should be heavily involved for a couple reasons. Even if you use a construction manager, at the end of the job, they're still going to leave, and you're going to be at the facility. And second reason is the more time you spend with a construction manager or owner's rep, in my opinion, the sooner you can do it on your own. And I think that's a cool goal to have. I think it's totally possible. I did a couple jobs at the center and one job at Marlboro alongside a construction manager. And now I do the last couple big ones. I've performed that for the school. So it's a cool way to diversify your job and to add another feather to your hat. So best practices in project management. This list is not comprehensive. It's what's been important to me. It's what I've seen work really well. And the 2 biggest ones by a long shot is communication and collaboration. Communicate proactively and team up. So I'll just kind of run down it. I think preventative communication saves us so often from having to say sorry, because talking about something that's taken place, whether it be having a crane on campus that beeps every 5 minutes, or hot mopping showers where you have that smell coming into all the classrooms. If you talk about that stuff after the fact, you're probably just apologizing. If you talk about that stuff before the fact and you build it into a schedule to communicate to people on campus or people in the neighborhood, on a weekly or bi-weekly basis ahead of time, that's preventative communication. I think that goes a long, long way. You want to do that as much as you possibly can when you're managing a project. Prompt follow-ups, understanding the budget, asking questions, and then actually listening to the answers. I have this problem where sometimes I'll ask a question and it might be a great question, but I'll stop listening halfway through because I'm already thinking about something else. I think that active listening is a really good skill to practice as we manage these projects. Closing feedback loops, keeping your school community informed, creating site access, All those things are important. Communicating and planning and being ready to tweak those plans are very important. Pushing chemistry, I think this is a big deal. I think it's real easy at the beginning when everybody's excited and onboarding themselves on a job. And actually, let me pause and just say, I wanted to say this at the beginning of the slide, but this kind of is where I'm separating to more of construction project management now, or larger capital improvement jobs. This stuff doesn't come into play as much on service-based, janitorial, custodial. While we still need to manage those things, the rest of my presentation centering more around project management for construction and capital projects. So with that being said, pushing chemistry is always going to be important. It's not always going to be easy to do. I put on here, it's easier said than done. Everybody's in a pretty good mood at the beginning of the project, but there's a grind, and it starts to take its toll on everybody throughout the project. So doing what you can to continue that, to keep to be a cheerleader for the project, actually, and keep the morale up as best you can is important. And it's not always easy. I think weekly meetings are essential with the owner, the architect, and the contractor to be involved and check in. And there's a ancient proverb that talks about when you've made it 90% down a path, you're halfway there. And there's something oddly true about that logic, and it's frustrating, but the last 10% of the job is always the hardest, hands down. You're wrapping up all the loose ends, you're up against it on time, you're up against it on money, and everybody's grumpy, because it's the end of the project and you've been through it, you've been through all these changes. If you're paying close attention to the chemistry all along the way, I think it just makes it easier. Teaming up, this is the collaboration part, also super important. We're the school, we have to manage this, whether we're the construction manager or not. I think your in-house staff should be involved, your facilities team should be involved in terms of walking the job periodically, seeing where things are located. They are the end users after all. Construction manager is a question mark. Again, I have that in there, whether you use one or not, they're involved, either it's somebody else or it's you. And one thing to remember too, contractors and architects, they came from an RFP. So if we laid out what we needed to lay out correctly in the RFP, we'll already have them as a positive team member. I have peers and colleagues and counterparts in here. That's what we're doing right now. I think that nobody succeeds in a silo in these projects. One of the best things that's helped me along the way is watching people that I work with. Back at the Center for Early Education, it was obviously Ravita, but it was Frank Peralta, who was our director of facilities, and Erica Johnson. And they taught me so much about working at an independent school and the inner workings of how these projects and processes go. Now it's Nick Hernandez at Marlboro. And I'm not just saying that because Nick is possibly on the call or my boss or the past president of Cal-ISBOA. I'm saying it because Nick has been hugely helpful just by working around him and me being willing to kind of pay attention to things in my growth. And it's been a big part of why I'm able to now represent the school and run these jobs. Advancement department, you cannot ignore the fundraising on these projects. You need to be open to hosting tours, documenting the project for them, and keeping things moving so that these things can get paid for. And then I think the biggest one is probably the neighbors, because we all have to live up to a conditional use permit, which can, at the end of the day, prevent us from doing these jobs in the first place. So keeping neighbors in the collaborative group is important. Staying transparent goes a long way in reducing conflicts. Everything's out on the table. When you have emails going around about issues that are going to affect the critical path of the schedule, we need to have the right people involved, and just that pushing transparency is really important. Technology is our friend on these jobs, and it's changing so fast and it's becoming more and more beneficial. I think every project that I do, I see something crazy out there that's new. We document our projects with OxBlue. These are still cameras that are placed throughout the project, and they take a picture every 10 minutes from, during work from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. They take a photograph every 10 minutes. And then at the end of the project, you create these amazing time-lapse videos, which is good for engagement as for ribbon cutting. You can show the whole process. Along the way, you can do these videos to engage donors, alums. It's just a great tool. It also adds an extra layer of security. And preventative management, project management software has come a long way too. We use something called Procore. This keeps everything in one place. This helps with that documentation part that we saw in the cartoon drawing at the beginning. It actually makes it really easy. We've got our superintendent taking photographs every day, and those get uploaded. We've got all of our RFI responses getting uploaded. We've got all of our submittals, our baseline schedule, our blueprints, everything's in Procore, and everybody has access. And the last one's fairly obvious, but it can't be understated. We celebrate milestones along the way. It breaks up the grind. It builds momentum. We just had a taco cart out at the job at Marlboro. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I'm right in the middle of a huge remodel at Marlboro School, which actually, that's this. So manage the project. In one of my courses at UCLA Extension, I had an instructor that talked about managing the project, and she said it all the time. She said it loudly, and I always wondered exactly what she meant, but she broke it down for us. And it's very important in project management not to forget to manage the project. And it sounds so elementary, but it's very, very easy to get caught up in all the minutia and the controls that we have to apply to keep the budget and the schedule online and manage all these personalities. You can't forget to manage the project. You have to keep critical path in mind, and you have to keep the human factor in mind. Leading with humility when dealing with all these different personalities is like grassroots project management, and you can't let that go when things start unraveling, because it can happen. Shane, last time I talked about critical path, Shane asked me to expand upon it a little bit, so I'll do that. I'll do that now. Critical path is the things in your schedule that have to happen next before things behind it can happen. So it's basically a product of what your contractor should provide you on a larger job is a baseline schedule that shows every single task and how long, every single task plus its duration. Critical path starts to get backlogged when you don't hit those marks every day. So having weekly OAC meetings is hugely important to keeping that all moving, so that when there's a problem on the horizon, all members of the team know about it and you get into the solution. If you're having these conversations on the back end after the problems happen, everybody's panicked and you start to unravel, and your project date just starts getting pushed. Your project completion date starts getting pushed back, and typically there's not a whole lot of wiggle room in that. So the critical path is the through line in the baseline schedule that basically keeps everything on schedule. When Tina said manage the project, she was talking about having to adjust your plan. You just have to manage the project. This diagram was something we used just a couple weeks ago, because one of the silver linings of this pandemic has been we've been able to build without doing all the choreography with students. On April 12th, we brought students back for instruction for the first time this year, which is great. It's all great. But we were knee deep in construction, and the contractors were a little bit too comfortable. So we had to manage the project. We got with our project executives, and we developed a plan to share the driveway, to share it with buses. We figured out where subcontractors would park. We figured out where staff and faculty would park, and we just managed the project. When you have to manage faculty and neighbors that are growing impatient, you just get back to project management. When you have to deal with tempers that flare, you just manage the project, and that's an easy thing to forget, but also a good thing to remember. When to get help. So there's firms out there, and I've used them plenty, that specialize in construction management, or they can be called an owner's rep. Actually, probably a lot of our large construction projects have this built in. It's only recently that I've kind of taken this on myself at Marlboro. It just felt like it was time. I actually learned from a couple of the best out there in LA. I think some of you might know Denise Gutchess, who used to run a construction management firm, and also Tom Gothigan, who is kind of back and forth between here and New York, but they both did amazing work. And just by watching them, it's a great example of, if you're not the designated owner's rep for the school projects, you just still show up and you get yourself a seat at that table so you can watch and learn. When you might want to get help, when, if technical knowledge is lacking, definitely, if you can't fully commit, these larger projects need constant attention. So if you can't fully commit, you should probably contact a construction management firm. When city permitting is complicated, which is any job in LA, you should consider a firm because they typically have permit expediters and ways around that process. If your general contractor doesn't have a deep bench, you might have chosen a smaller boutique firm that doesn't have the depth to provide a project executive. If they have a smaller team, you might want to consider bringing on owner's rep. And if you struggle with delivering bad news, I say this one because you have to really take yourself out of the equation. Although we work for the school, there's a lot of times we have to be objection, we have to deliver bad news to the school side and to the contractor side. And we have to be able to do that in a pragmatic way where we take ourselves out of that equation a little bit and just get into the solution. If you struggle with that, you might want to get some assistance in there for that. I think one of the last slides I have is a mind map. It just kind of illustrates the process. As I see it, this certainly isn't totally exhaustive, but it captures a lot of things. The RFP side is on the left and the project management side is on the right. I put stars on, I think, what are the most important pieces, and they both revolve around relationships. And at the end of the day, while controls and contracts and quality assurance and risk management, they're all super important parts of the project that you can't leave out. But at the end of the day, I really feel like this is about relationships and the purpose of the project, the purpose of the partnership, how you communicate with stakeholders. You can see down on the left here, this is the 4 steps of managing the RFP. This is the section that I throw in for Nick Hernandez. He loves a good contract, and he's brought me along that journey with him, understanding the importance of all the intricacies of a contract. That needs to all be in there. Over here on the right, you have the big 3 with the other little star: money, time, and quality assurance. At the end of the project, that's really all that sticks out. I mean, the relationships are still important, but they're kind of a mean to the end. The ending metric is going to be, did you hit the budget? Were you on time? And was it done right? So again, this will be available for you afterwards. And the last thing in closing, I like to make a little push for the professional development mechanisms that have been really important to me and really helped me. Cal-ISBOA is at the top. I really appreciate them jumping more into the facilities side. So it's going to be fun to support that and to benefit from that in years to come. UCLA Extension has an amazing, amazing program on construction management. It's a little bit time set. It's 32 units, but this is taught by real life professionals it's men and women who go to a job every day in construction management or project management, and they come and teach in the evenings, and it's so beneficial. IFMA, I talked a little bit about, super important to me. I belong to IFMA. I do have the CFM accreditation designation. It was a great course of study to go through. I still benefit a lot from their chat groups, and the Academic Facilities Council is a great resource. That's just made up of facilities professionals from elementary schools all the way through higher ed. It's a very tight-knit group, and you can register by county. PMI, Project Management Institute, that's kind of my next one that I have my eye on, checking out a little bit more. I know they have a lot of great resources for project management professionals, and it's a great community for further development. That's all I've got. I'd love to talk more, either now or offline. If anybody has any stories to share or questions to ask, it'd be awesome to continue a dialogue.
Yeah, feel free to jump in and unmute yourself if you have any questions, or if you have any experience in project management or RFPs that you'd like to share with the group.
Anybody building right now? Anybody have any fun projects going on?
Hi, I have a little school of 200 students in Palo Alto, and it's an all-girls school, and it's my first year being facilities director. I'm coming from the sports background. I guess athletics and facilities seems to work together. And I am about to start a remodeling project of 2 rooms. It used to be a laboratory building, and now we have science rooms that are kind of having islands sticking to the room, preventing us from having it operational because of COVID. Plus, we're not really using that counter space. So I am looking at removing the islands and pulling water back to the wall and having the sink there. And I'm having a really hard time finding people to do it. As you said, everybody's super busy. So I'm just not giving up because that's what we do, right? And just hope that there will be a kind soul that would take on that little project. But if you have any tricks up your sleeves, please share them with me. I'd love to hear.
That's great. You said you're up in the Bay Area, right? Yeah, I would try the just the Cal-ISBOA network. There's Michelle, isn't there a mechanism for just to throw it out there?
Yeah, she can, if you want to just email the listserv, if you're a participant on the listserv, I think I can put the link of the email in the chat. But I think just putting it out there, if anybody might have any contractors, up in the Bay Area to recommend, at least you can maybe gather a few more names to contact some people to see if they're available.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think Brooke Pitcher is a great resource for the Bay. He's at, I forget what school he's at. I was hoping he'd be on here. I'll bet he knows. He's in this conference somewhere.
Do we have any more questions or feedback? It's Friday, everybody's ready for lunch.
No, it's better to go right before lunch though than right after when
I know.
really asleep. This has
Well,
been great.
if we don't have any other questions or anybody else who wants to share, thank you so much, Matt. This was really informative, and hopefully there will be emails going out about the materials, all the slides from all the presentations, and any materials will be available for everybody participating in the conference. So thank you so much, Matt. And then I believe at 11:40, I have to look at the calendar here. Yeah, at 11:45 is the closing workshop. So if you guys all want to hop over there, Martha probably has some closing comments. But thank you all for participating, and thank you, Matt.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I just wanted to say thanks, Matt. I think that was really, really important and informative. Very well done.
Sure.
Lots to think about.
Good to see you, Jennifer.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.